Okay, so welcome to part 2 of Classroom Management 101. And so we've talked about procedures versus rules. And hopefully you've identified or come up with, created your personal set of rules, hopefully no more than 5, just to make it easy on yourself, and that they are positively stated. So now it's time to talk about consequences, all right? And one thing that I know classroom management is moving into and towards is positive and negative consequences. So positive reinforcement and then, consequences for misconduct. So I know that a lot of people recommend, and I have done this before, and probably need to do it again for this year. I'm feeling it this year because I was bumped up from 7th to 8th grade, as I told in my introduction. Because I was bumped up, I had most of the same kids, so they kind of knew the drill. I'm not going to have the same kids now. I'm going to have new kids. So you can guarantee that I am going to identify consequences for breaking the rules. All right, so when we talk about consequences, let's first think about negative. Let's get that out of the way, because you do want your classroom to be a positive environment, and you want your kids to want to be there, all right? And I'm going to pass on a little nugget, a crepe cake, if you will, that was passed on to me, and I think probably a lot of you maybe have heard this. Bad structure, crappy structure is better than no structure. Kids crave structure. So having your positives and your negative consequences lined out and being consistent with them will help keep that structure, and it will help keep behavior problems to a minimum, okay? So what are some negative consequences? I'm going to throw out some examples. The most obvious consequence for a misconduct, for breaking the rules, is to warn the student. Identify for them what they are doing wrong and how they can correct it, all right? And give them an opportunity to do that. Sometimes we can say that more publicly. Sometimes we need to come to a student and say it more privately. I would probably in most cases recommend that you do that privately. Get the student aside and say, what you're doing right now, it's not okay. It's disrupting learning. You're not learning, and I'm not able to teach, so I need you to do this. And give them a behavior to act out, okay? Don't leave them hanging. Some kids don't know what to do. And I know for a lot of people, especially people who've been teaching for a while, and they don't get that. But this is a new generation, okay? These kids, we have so many kids and so many lives walking through our classroom every single day, and some of them do not know how to behave in a more formal setting. And you make sure that you set up your classroom as a formal setting. So sometimes, on occasion, if it comes up, I may ask something like this. I may set this prompt out there, this question out there. And some of you may question what I'm about to say, but I think it gets the point across to a kid. So I'll say something like this. I'll ask a kid, okay, how many of you would walk into a church and cuss? Well, the look on their face, they're absolutely horrified that I just even thought of that, okay? So it kind of grabs, it's an attention grabber, right? And so I'm not prying into their personal, religious beliefs or whatever. But the next thing I'll say is, if you would not do that in a church, why would you do that in this classroom? Okay? This classroom is a formal setting. This is not a place where we where we use that kind of language, all right? So you need to make some parallels for them. Make it clear that your classroom is a formal setting, okay? So we've given a warning, and the behavior still continues. So what's next? At this point, I am going to say you start removing privileges. You start taking something away. Now, all of that is contingent on what your district and campus policy is. They all have different things. Some of them, it may be, you lose your recess. Some of them maybe you sit out at lunch. Some of them maybe you stay after school. ISS, I don't know. But what you have to do in terms of consequences is be reasonable and logical and go down the list, exhaust the remedies, okay? We cannot give a kid, well, let me say this, in a lot of cases, and especially in a school that's more challenging to work with, lower socioeconomic populations, I don't think it's fair to send a kid to the office for cursing, especially when it's their first time to do so. I think that's where we teach them, okay, I understand you use that language, but I want you to respect me and be respectful to other people around you, and I want you to try your very best to not use that language in this classroom. And that's a warning, and it is a consequence in a way, because the kid has received a negative reinforcement for it, all right? So what I would do then is I would identify consequences and I would post them. So what I typically see in classrooms is something like this: warning, some sort of detention. And you may have a couple of detentions set up. You may have like a lunch detention and then an after-school detention, along with a parent phone call. And then you go to office referral, okay? And then after that, it becomes the office's problem. And they themselves most likely have a protocol for following, okay, first offense, after-school detention, meeting with parents, second offense, ISS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we always have to go down the list. So have that posted in your classroom. On the other hand, and this is the harder part, guys, this is one of the hardest parts of managing behavior, is reinforcing good behavior. And it's really hard to reinforce good behavior of all kids. I was going to say of a certain kind of kid, but no, all kids. It's hard to reinforce behavior of kids who are doing what they're supposed to do, who know how to behave in school, who take school seriously. And it's even more difficult to reinforce behavior for kids who give you hell every day. All right? But we got to do it. So we can do that in a variety of ways. So if you were to make a list of positive consequences, what would be some of the things that you would put on there? I want to challenge you to think about that. And in the next segment, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some positive consequences and how to keep up with that. That was actually one of, when I took my research class for my first master's degree in curriculum and instruction, I researched this aspect of a 3-to-1 positive to negative behavior support, and I'll get into that later. So now your challenge is this. So we've talked about consequences, and those are obvious. That's something you can consult with your staff or faculty or district handbook. That's simple, all right? But positive consequences are a little more challenging for you. Well, they're a little more challenging for me. So in the next segment, let's talk about some positive consequences and how we can utilize those in our classroom. So make a list, check it twice, and I will see you guys next time.